All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're cracking the code on one of the most fascinating, complex, and honestly, influential periods in literary history, the Victorian era. So, when you hear the word Victorian, what pops into your head? Come on, be honest. For a lot of us, it's probably this black and white photo of people who look, well, a little uptight, right? We imagine all these strict rules, buttoned up morals, and a super proper way of life. But is that really the whole picture? Not even close. For the people who actually lived it, the Victorian era felt like an age of nonstop, rocket-fueled change. It was this incredible time of progress, clashing head-on with enormous problems. It was messy, it was chaotic, it was a massive transformation. And all of that chaos? Well, that brings us to our very first major theme. If you really want to get Victorian literature, you have to understand that it was born from this era of huge contradictions. Okay, pens out, because as you can see, we've got an exam alert on the screen. This right here is the absolute foundational must-know definition. The Victorian era lines up with Queen Victoria's reign from 1837 all the way to 1901. And in that one stretch of time, Britain went from being a mostly rural, farm-based country to a global industrial powerhouse. Everything else we talk about, it all stems from this. And this slide just lays out that central conflict perfectly. On one side, you've got the official story, the Victorian ideal of duty, morality, and the perfect family. But right under the surface, there was this other, much harsher reality: rampant poverty, brutal child labor, a deep crisis of religious faith, and just constant social unrest. So, what was the engine driving all this contradiction and change? Well, there's one force that stands way above everything else: the Industrial Revolution. Technology completely blew up the literary world. Think about it. The steam printing press meant you could churn out books cheaply and in huge numbers. And at the same time, you've got this new railroad network that can ship those books all over the country like never before. And the result? This is the crucial part. For the first time in history, books and stories weren't just a luxury for the rich. Literature became accessible to pretty much everyone. So you've got this massive, brand new audience that's suddenly hungry for stories. What happens next? Well, that demand gave birth to what would become the most powerful literary form of the entire century. And that form, of course, was the novel. The novel just exploded in popularity. It became the undisputed king of Victorian literature, mostly because it was the perfect art form for this new world. It was the one genre that could really dig into the complexity, the social problems, and the day-to-day lives of regular people. Yeah, so instead of telling stories about gods and kings, the Victorian novel pointed its camera right at ordinary people who were trying to figure out how to live in a society that was changing at a dizzying pace. It really was like a mirror, reflecting all the hopes, the fears, and the struggles of a whole nation. Now hang on to that idea, the novel as a mirror, because we are definitely coming back to it. So, if the novel was the mirror, who were the people holding it up? Who were these writers that were shaping how an entire generation saw itself? Okay, this is a really critical idea. Victorian authors didn't think of themselves as just entertainers. Not at all. They really believed they had a moral purpose. They saw it as their actual duty to act as guides, to point out society's flaws, and to call for change. And to make sure this idea of moral purpose really sticks, we are going to burn this image into your brain. I want you to picture Charles Dickens, but not as a writer. Picture him as a prosecutor in a courtroom. He's got the judge's wig on, he's pointing an angry finger right at the injustices of the factories and the slums. This image is staying right here on screen so you can lock it in. This is the heart of what a Victorian writer was: part storyteller and part social crusader. So we've covered the contradictions, the technology that changed everything, and these writers who saw themselves as crusaders for change. Now, let's tie it all together and see how this incredible era is still shaping our world right now. Okay, time for our 2-minute echo. A little while ago, we talked about the novel as a mirror that reflects society, remember? Well, let's look at that again, but from a new angle. Because the novel wasn't just a passive mirror, it was an active tool. It didn't just show you what was happening, it critiqued the human cost of all that progress. It put a face on huge problems like poverty and child labor to actively demand that things get better. All right, your turn. Let's really lock this concept in. Based on everything we've just discussed, how did these Victorian authors use their novels to fight back against social inequality? Go ahead, think about it. Pause for 10 seconds of silence. Here it is.
They did it by being witnesses. They basically dragged the harsh, ugly realities of the slums and the factories right into the comfortable living rooms of the middle and upper classes. They exposed how indifferent the wealthy were, and through their characters, they made this powerful emotional argument for empathy and for real concrete reform.
All right, let's wrap this up with your memory map, the 3 biggest takeaways. First, the Victorian era was all about contradiction, amazing progress right next to terrible poverty. Second, the novel became the most important social tool of the age, used to critique society and demand change. And third, that legacy is still with us. The debates they started about technology, class, and morality, they are the exact same debates we're still having today.
And that just leaves us with one last thing to think about. The Victorians struggled with this paradox of a society that was getting richer and more advanced, but was still leaving so many people behind. Now, over a century later, how different are the challenges that we face? What paradoxes of progress and inequality do you see all around you in our own world?